7:30. I believe it's the time to start our meeting. This is a rather unique way to have a meeting that we haven't experienced before, but I'm looking forward to doing this. Can everyone hear me? Why don't you nod your heads if you can? Okay, great. Looks like the technology is working. I believe that all of our council is present. I'm looking at the various screens. I see Mr. Thompson. I see Mr. Whitaker. I see Ms. Duff. Mr. Freeman is on one of these screens. There he is, and Mr. Luna. So all of our council is present. As you may have already gathered, that as a result of the corona pandemic, the city of Mesa has drastically reduced possibilities for people to interact with each other through social distancing. We appreciate that. We appreciate the city staff working hard to get this option available for us so we can conduct the city's business and have a council meeting without creating a situation that isn't consistent with our current circumstances. So,
Mayor, I'm sorry. Mayor, this is Deanne. I'm sorry. Is Councilmember Heredia also there?
Yes, Councilmember Heredia is, I'm looking at him now.
Okay, thank you.
Frankie, can you hear us? Okay, gave me the thumbs up. Okay, so all of our council is present. So we have no absences. The first item on our agenda for today is to hear a presentation on Mesa Central Business District. But if you don't mind, just given the circumstances that we were in, it would seem inappropriate to not begin the meeting with at least an acknowledgement of what we're experiencing right now. So I'm going to, under agenda item 3, current event summary, just make a short statement. And this is somewhat similar to the statement we made at the beginning of our meeting on Monday. Since Monday, there have continued to be developments. I think everyone is aware that on Tuesday, we declared a state of emergency in our city. I appreciate our city council's support in that, making that decision. This is a process that's authorized by state statute. What it does is once we make that declaration, it makes available to the city tools for a quick response to protect the public health. And again, this is because we're very serious about the city's response to this pandemic. Thus far, the city's response, I think, has been very responsible and appropriate. As we know, most of the city facilities have been closed at a minimum through the end of the month, including libraries, museums, the Mesa Arts Center, our aquatic center, various programs, and all city events. This declaration and the city's response has certainly had an impact on our business community. Part of the emergency declaration was a request to our business community and our faith community to do all that they can to be in compliance with the CDC's recommendation on social distancing. And I'm pleased to say that we've had very good voluntary compliance with that request. Movie theaters in the city, gymnasiums, gyms, restaurants have all, I think, demonstrated a real good faith effort to comply with that request. I'm sure the response has not been perfect. So I think we need to continue in a spirit of not seeking to enforce things punitively, but in a spirit of educating people and helping them to understand the importance of social distancing. We need to continue to work with organizations and individuals in the community that maybe are out of step with social distancing. But again, I think the best way to accomplish that is rather through, not through enforcement, but through education and through social pressure. If there are glaring examples of businesses or organizations that seem indifferent to the requests that we've made, I'd like to know about it. So please, through social media or otherwise, please share those concerns with me, and we'll do our best to help people in a voluntary way come into compliance. However, as a result of the emergency declaration, we do have the ability to mandate a compliance. My preference is to not do that. but that is certainly a possibility. I'd also just like to thank the faith community. They've been a very big part of the response to this situation. There's been a lot of ministering that's been going on in the faith community and in the nonprofit community. This has been very inspiring to see the way that Mesa has rallied around each other and taken care of each other. But to the faith community, I would continue to remind them that they need to look for opportunities to minister to folks in ways other than large meetings. So such events as weddings and funerals and worship services may not be consistent with the CDC recommendations. All right, well, thank you for that opportunity just to kind of recap where we are at this point. Again, under current events and reports and meetings from conferences attended, I look forward to hearing from council members on all the good work that has been going on in their districts in response to this crisis. Moving on now with the agenda. Item 1A is to hear a presentation and provide direction on the renewal of Mesa's Central Business District. I believe we have a staff presentation on this item. Is that correct?
Bill Chipchiniak, Economic Development Director, and with me I have David Packard from the Economic Development staff, and also on the phone we have our consultant from Matrix Design Group, Felipe Zubia and Martin Scribner, I believe, are on the phone for a part of the presentation. So we're here this morning to talk about our Central Business District and the renewal of that designation. But first, let me go into a little bit of history here. When the city has a Central Business District, they typically qualify for federal and state funding that may be available, specifically designated for those areas. So a great example of that is the GPLET statute, Government Property Lease Excise Tax. You can maximize the use of that particular incentive when you are in a Central Business District. So a few years ago, we were strategizing about how to spur development in the Fiesta area. And when we were able to go down and designate that area, as we presented that to council, which they approved, they also asked us to look to the east and west and really follow the light rail development, and how do we continue to look at bringing those tools to those areas to help incentivize development as well. The other thing I want to make a note of is we tried very hard to avoid housing designations on most of these areas, especially going east and down into the southwest part of the Fiesta area. And the next slide is a map of our Central Business District as it is today. So as noted on the map, there are actually 4 redevelopment areas, but only 1 Central Business District, and that's important. The area to the lower right-hand side of that slide talks about when each of these areas were established and their blight percentages when they were established just a few years ago. Again, Town Center was 99, but then Southwest was 2016, and East and West was 2017. In 2018, new legislation was passed, and that is the slide up in front of you now. And really, the statute called for a renewal of those central business districts by October 1 of this year. And there's basically 3 choices: renew it, modify it, or terminate the designation. You must do that every 10 years, and if you do not renew it, it then terminates 5 years thereafter. So, and again, I think it's important, the size of the redevelopment area by statute has been reduced, and we are grandfathered in with the size of our central business district. So Matrix Design Group, who did the East and West designations, as I mentioned, performed the analysis. So let me turn it over to Martin and Felipe to get into the detailed analysis.
Bill, if you don't mind, let me just, I probably should have at the outset given some help to our council members for how to participate in the meeting. Obviously, please feel free to ask questions during the course of the presentation, just because we need to be a little more formal because of the technology involved. if you could just give me a high, I can see everyone. So if you can just give me a high sign, raise your hand if you have a question so that we can appropriately interrupt the speakers. And that's the case throughout the meeting. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Bill, please proceed. Well, are there any council member questions at this point? Thank you. I see Mr. Freeman has Mr. Freeman, go ahead.
Yes, Bill, on the 10-year cycle to renew, when would that terminate?
It would have to be renewed by October 1 of 2020, so you would have 10 years going forward again, so you have till 2030 to do the next analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, please proceed.
Okay, Martin, do you want to take over the presentation on the phone in terms of the analysis?
Sure.
Okay.
Honorable Mayor and council members, my name is Martin Scribner. I'm with Matrix Design Group. I think what we're going to discuss today is kind of the process that we went through and what we found in working with Bill and David during this process. So we'll go ahead and get back to the slides if that's all right. So first we're going to talk a little bit. We want to make sure everybody remembers exactly what the state statute says about what we're doing here. So we're establishing these blighted areas, or reestablishing the blighted areas. And that's basically anything where the conditions in those areas don't allow for good development or redevelopment. And really what we're talking about is any problems with the plats or with the lot layouts themselves, or any kind of unsanitary, unsafe conditions, any kind of deterioration, anything of that nature. So there are those 9 criteria that are on your screen now. I won't go through all of those, but we are going to hit the highlights of what we found considering those blight criteria. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about how we went through the process. As you know, the CBD is over 8,000 parcels. And so we split that up into 54 sub areas so that we could organize the area and make sure that we were getting through the on-site evaluations efficiently. And what we did was we took a team of Matrix employees and went out into the field. And we used an app on our phone called Fulcrum. And we used this previously when we did the East and West areas in 2017. And basically, we walked around the area or drove around the area, depending. And we used the Fulcrum app. We would stand or sit in front of the parcel in question. And the app itself has GPS, so it knew where we were standing. And we would take a picture of the conditions of that parcel, as well as we were able to, as you can see, there are examples on the screen there of what we were looking at on our phones. And one of the great things about the app allowed us to put this information right into the system without having to write it down and then bring it back and put it in. So it saved us a lot of time. But basically, we were able to determine blight, put in if there was one or more different criteria of blight that were met on that parcel. We take additional pictures of the parcel and then put in any notes as well if there was something specific that we wanted to point out about that parcel. We also used the aerials that we obtained from the county assessor's office and the parcel information so that we could access any parcels or view any parcels that maybe we couldn't see from the field because there was a gate or a fence, or maybe there was some construction or something that wouldn't allow us to see what we needed to see. And then we also reviewed the statistical data, namely any crime data or code compliance violation type data. Those were not, those were contributing factors, especially when we talk about safety or deterioration. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the top 3 blight factors that we saw. And so the first one is the deterioration of the site or other improvements. So that's basically any kind of general deterioration, either from, you know, the structure's getting older, or it's weathering, or maybe it just needs some maintenance. There's a roof problem or paint or any of those types of things, anything that's pretty obvious. Or if the property or the structures are vacant, as you can see, the number of blighted parcels, we were over 20, and I'm having a hard time seeing that. I think it's 25% and about 30% of the acreage. So you'll see as we go through these, we use both of those determinations. We talk about either number of parcels or the number of acres. So again, about 25% had this blight factor. In terms of parcels, about 30% of the acreage. Next slide, please. The second highest blight factor that we witnessed was unsanitary or unsafe conditions. So this should be pretty self-explanatory. Any situation on the parcel that could be harmful for health and safety. This could be trash on the property. It could be animal droppings. It could be storage of junk or other items that really don't have any value. Again, these are just examples. It could include other items as well. In this situation, we saw about 18% of the parcels that contained this blight factor and 28% of the acreage that contained this blight factor. Next slide.
Thank you, Martin. If you could, I think Mr. Whitaker has a question.
Sure. Martin, I got a quick question. When I'm looking at your map, how do you determine your eastern boundary, or where do you stop? Like, why does the map stop as opposed, or do we analyze that? You know, I guess I'm just trying to define what does central business district mean, and why does it not go further east? I know there's a lot of mobile home parks and stuff that run throughout that area, and maybe they're just not as blighted as this area. I'm not sure.
So I can answer that question. I would also, Bill, if you want to chime in on this, but basically all of the 4 redevelopment areas, and as well as the central business district itself, were determined or pre-designated. So this effort or this exercise, we didn't expand that area at all. So we worked with what the city already had. Bill, if you want to add to that at all.
So this is Chris Brady. That's correct. So what the effort is here is just to go back to the existing boundaries of the existing central business district as required now by state law, to go back and re-evaluate whether it meets the criteria. And so there wasn't any adjustments to any of the boundaries. These boundaries have existed since
99 on the
99.
town
So
center one.
council back in 1999 established these boundaries.
The town center boundary was established in 1999, and then as Bill mentioned earlier, the southwest portion was established in 2016, and the east and west were added in 2017.
And Mayor and Council, this is Jim. The state statute changed just a couple years ago requiring us to do this, but it also changed in a couple other ways, in that it's really, we're sort of grandfathered in on what we have, and so to change these boundaries, we can't expand them. In fact, there's a number of limitations now, and so the ability to go back and expand these boundaries doesn't exist anymore because of the changes that occurred a couple years ago.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, so if that answers the question, we can go ahead to the next slide. The third blight factor that we saw was improper or obsolete subdivision platting. So this is any kind of, obviously this is something that we didn't see on the ground as well as we did when we got back to the office and kind of looked at the parcel lines and how everything fit together. Although some of those did pop out at us when we were in the field looking at the app, as the app did have the aerials and the parcels on it. And so this could pertain to any lot that maybe is too small to really be of any use, or has an odd shape and couldn't be used for much, or maybe it couldn't fit a structure on it, or it has no access to the right of way. And so we did see almost 10% of the parcels with that condition, or over 14% of the acreage with that condition as well. And remember that any of the parcels that were blighted, many of them saw more than one, some of them up to 6 different blight factors that were contained on one parcel. So what you're seeing is those separated out as one at a time. Next slide, please. So overall, what we saw for the entire central business district is over 4,500 parcels identified with at least one of those blight factors, and that's out of 8,260 parcels. So that is overall 55% of the parcels and 68% of the acreage. So the measure is predominance of blight, and we feel that both in parcels and in acreage, the city met that measure. Next slide, please. So in summary, we did in our investigation determine that there is a predominance of those blight conditions in the CBD overall, and that redevelopment of the central business district is in the residents' best interest when we're talking about safety and welfare. Remember that there are benefits that come with that that Bill covered earlier in terms of incentives, grants, the use of GPLET, CDBG funds, and other types of funds. And so pursuant to ARS, the project team recommends that you as city council renew the blight status and maintain that development authority in your central business district. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Felipe and I are both here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Martin. Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I guess I have a question really for Bill, and that is, you know, for 21 years, we've had this central business district, and it was identified, I guess, back then with having blight, and today we still have blight. So what is that? What exactly are we doing to move the needle, to bring projects in, to eliminate some of the blight? What's the city doing, and what are the business owners? I mean, it seems like if there's incentives and there's opportunities for property owners and business owners to eliminate some of the blight and take advantage of these incentives and GPLETs, why aren't they doing that? And why do we continue to maintain this central business district if nothing is, if the needle's not being moved?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Thompson. Actually, I've only been here 12 and a half of those 20 years or so, but I guess the biggest, highest profile one, for more than 15 years, the northwest corner of Alma School in Southern sat vacant. And that's been designated a blighted parcel or many parcels. And by use of this tool, in particular GPLET, and by being in a central business district, he stepped up and actually you approved a redevelop or a project last summer for that. So I think that's probably one of the highest profile, and that was one of the most blighted corners, and not just Mesa, but the entire valley. So for us, just having it for that was a major step forward, and you're seeing some of that start to mobilize down there now. We continue to have discussions in and around with the Fiesta Mall owners. You know, there's different ownership issues there. You continue to look at in downtown. And I don't have specifically which projects were funded with the use of GPLET or other incentives in downtown, but I do know in the town center area, there have been recent discussions about GPLET on projects. And again, that's one of the tools that we continue to promote about being able to revitalize an area. So I think that's been a big step forward.
Yeah, this is Chris. I would also say, as much as we have tools available, it just feels like every year the legislature takes more of those tools or the parts of those tools away from us, at least since I've been here for the last 14 years. It's been more difficult to do these projects because the incentives that have been in place have been diluted or taken away by the legislature. So we're left with only a very few tools to have available. Now, this does not preclude the city from coming up with its own incentives or programs within these designated areas. We can do that, and using the fact that they've been designated RDA allows us to create distinctive programs or incentives within these districts. So there are still opportunities for us to look at other ways. I would say the Central Business District, from what it looked like 15 years ago to today, while it still may be considered blighted, I would say it's materially improved, and significant millions and millions of dollars have been invested and continue to be invested in the downtown. So, I think you can look at it, glass half empty or glass half full, but I think we're at least moving in the right direction. I think, I'm hoping, but in the next 10 years, if we had to do the study again, I think our goal would be that we would fail the blight test, and we would, remove this designation. So.
And Chris, and that's my hope too. And I guess ultimately that was my question is are we moving the needle? Especially when you look at Main or Broadway, from the canal, heading back to the east, are we moving the needle in that area where we have some of the old, pay by the hour hotels and different things like that are really kind of driving some of the blight in the western part of our community?
That's a great question, and I think the good two best examples of that are Mesa Royale and Country Club in Maine, where we have active developments that are changing that. And I think once that developer can shows, we have agreements in place, we're working with them on a variety of financing and funding to get that done. I hope that once those projects come out of the ground, that will begin to establish a standard that we can work with other property owners on Maine. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but the good news is we know we have two sites on Maine that kind of meet that criteria that we have agreements with, and we're hoping to see some changes there.
Yes, Jen.
Yes, I have a few questions. Going back to slide 5, one of the criteria under the Arizona Revised Statutes is diversity of ownership, and I just want to understand what that means.
I think I'll let the consultant respond to that.
Sorry, I couldn't move to the unmute button quickly enough. A diversity of ownership, we know that when it comes to redevelopment of a site, if you've got a site that's, got 10 or 12 owners, sometimes that can become very difficult to redevelop or to organize and basically handle. So that becomes a blight issue because it just complicates things in a way that we all know human nature is that anybody to really agree on those things. But some of those properties and buildings in the area do have multiple owners, and it just makes things complicated.
Okay, so it's multiple owners.
Councilwoman, can I jump in there? This is Bill Jibjaniak. Another great example of that would be the Fiesta Mall. That property had 5 different property owners when we started. We're down to 2, so we're making progress, but that's diversity of ownership and creates a challenge to get any project started when you have that many owners and trying to get one vision going in one direction. So that's just an example I wanted to point out.
Yeah, that's the one I thought of right off the bat when you said it, multiple owners. On some of the blights, how much of it is really a code compliance issue, or when we're talking about things that are stored on the lots and, them being unkept?
I think, again, this is Martin. I think, there is a decent amount of it that, anytime you have any kind of unsightly storage in the front yard or trash that hasn't been picked up, even maintenance issues, those are at some level something that is handled with code compliance. Whether that's what's happening or not happening, I couldn't speak to that.
And I'm sure that we're also taking into consideration that a lot of the properties might be industrial, and so what we consider to be acceptable on an industrial lot would certainly differ from a public use or a residence.
That's correct. There still is some level of industrial blight that, you know, especially if there's a vacant property or something like that, which we did see some of.
So it wouldn't be necessarily that it's an industrial, but that the quality of that property. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So it's not necessarily that it's industrial, it's just how the property is kept or how things are stored or the quality of the buildings. Is that what we're getting to? It's not that it's
Yes.
industrial itself.
Yes, that's correct. The industrial itself is not a blight. It's designated as industrial as the city has in the zoning or in your general plan. So yeah, as long as it looks the way it's supposed to look, then it doesn't get blighted.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Frankie?
Yeah, my point was going back to Councilmember Thompson's point. Do we have information on what it looked like as far as percentage in the past? To the slide on the summary, slide 10. Is there a slide from the past that shows we were at 70% of the parcels blighted? Now we're at 55. Is there some data there around that piece?
If you go back to slide 3,
Maybe I missed it. Okay.
It's broken down by the RDAs because not all of the RDAs were assessed at one time. So in 1999, we didn't have the report from that blight assessment. From 2016 and 2017, so Southwest, East, and West redevelopment areas, you can see those numbers there where we're looking at still in the 50s for each one of those area in terms of parcels percentage. And then Southwest was 62% of the acreage. East, and remember Southwest too is very large parcels, not as many. And then East RDA is 52% acreage, and the RDA is 81% of the acreage. So comparably overall, we feel like it's, well, Bill, I'll kind of leave that for your determination. I think it's a tough comparison because we're missing some of that data.
Okay.
So, Councilmember, I think this is Bill Chipchiniak, and I think that overall we're making progress. If you look at the West RDA at 81% of the acreage, and today, again, we have to look at it as one central business district now. So today you're at 68% of the acreage meet the blight definition. So I think overall, when you put it together as a complete package, you're making progress. But again, the economy's been with you now for a few years. You're starting to get investment, and I think you will hopefully continue to see things move forward.
And just one detail to the map on the summary, looking at the corner of Dobson and Broadway, that industrial park. I don't know if why would that be considered blight? Where like Dexcom and the other some manufacturing has been built there over the last 15 years. But then the map it's highlighted there. So Bill, I don't know if you have or a consultant has any thoughts there.
So I can see the map, but I'm going to defer to you to what did you identify there, Martin, in terms of blight on that particular corner, if you have it available to you.
So I don't have access to the specific information right at this moment, but I believe that we did have some non-visual blight factors. One of those was the abundance of crime statistically speaking in the area, where we did consider that a safety issue. And it was basically anything where there were parcels that the crime was double the average across the rest of this, or the city overall. And so there were some fairly large areas, and we did this by census tract, that were blighted because of the crime issues in the area.
And let me remind the council, the way they do, this is, statistics now become part of your challenge here. If it's relative to the other parts of the city, yet overall, and I think I've made this point, the statistics overall for the city, the crime rate is actually down. So let's be careful how we read this. It's not necessarily relative to, any other city in the country. This is not necessarily a high crime rate. It is higher than the average, or more than high, higher for the city, but that doesn't necessarily make it a hotbed of crime in this area. We probably need to go look back and see and come back to you, Frankie, with an answer to this. I don't want us to kind of throw things out there without having the document in front of us that tells us why this is. Because if it's the industrial area where we have Dexcom, I can't imagine there's a lot of crime in those big warehouses and areas like that. Maybe, and that you think about that whole area, you know it better than I do. It's big box warehouses and facilities. So I'm trying to understand. I don't necessarily right now, based on that think that that's a high crime area. I don't know that the chiefs told me that we have a lot of break-ins in warehouses right now. So, but we can look and see and come back to you with a more definitive answer.
Yeah, no, just trying to understand, based on what was there in the past, I would say some of the warehousing that's been built there is a progress for that area, right? More jobs, more, the facilities there that been constructed over the last 15 years, I think it's actually lifted up that area. So
This is David speaking with Economic Development. We did notice a positive change in the amount of crime. Overall, in 2014, the city of Mesa had 33.0 type 1 crimes per 1,000 residents. In 2018, that number for the city as a whole is down to 24.3. And we saw that same trend happening in the central business district. In 2014, there were 83.5 type 1 crimes per 1,000 residents. 5 years later, that number is down to 56.0. So that's a positive change to note.
And maybe this is Martin again. I can add that, again, that's sort of that's a guess on my part right at this moment. But in the report, because of the Fulcrum app, we have notes and photographs of every parcel. So any specific parcel where there's a question, we can get into that information and make that determination and say, okay, this is exactly why this was blighted. And so, again, we can go in and find those answers for you if that's needed.
Okay, thank you. I believe Mr. Luna has a question.
I have a question for Bill. Hey, Bill, as we look at this area in the Central District Corridor, how does the opportunity zone and using GPLET, they seem to overlap. Now, when you go sell this area to potential developers, are you offering them the opportunity zone incentives as well as GPLET and anything else that might work?
Thank you, Council Member, Mayor. By all means, we talk about all the incentives that are available to us. When you can layer different incentives, it makes a difference. The opportunity zone designation and funds that are available certainly has created, and that's fairly recent now, that has created quite a bit of interest as well. So sometimes, and how the two tools work together is something that's being talked about in legal circles as well. So by all means, I think, and again, this whole western side of the city is an opportunity zone from the Tempe line between Broadway and University all the way out to Stapley. And that was designated on purpose so that we can put as many tools in play as we try to redevelop these areas.
Thank you. Council, any other questions on this item? Mr. Freeman.
Thanks, Mayor. I think this is great tools in our tool bag. I applaud, the city staff and everybody moving forward with this. I think figuring this all out and keeping it there to keep our city moving forward, economically, as well as improving. We have some underperforming areas in our city and leveraging opportunity zones, GPLIT, with our developers, and then helping our homeowners and residential neighborhoods in the area is critical for older neighborhoods. So, I'm all in. I think this is great. If we can extend it out 10 years, hopefully, to Mr. Thompson's point, the needle has moved even greater, and we see greater improvements in our community. So, again, I support the process. Thank you.
Yes, Jen.
I just want to chime in that I also support and renewing this as the CBD. Also in the report, another factor beyond the properties themselves, or just looking at the education levels, the median household income, the home values, a high number of rentals. There's a lot of other factors that support, the properties not being where they should be and still need some help. But I do want to also say that we need to be sensitive of the populations that live in our central business district and making sure that we provide the opportunities for them to rise with our success and not be pushed out or gentrified. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy.
Martin, I got a question. What are the downsides of us not renewing this as a district from your perspective?
Well, as mentioned, the advantages, some of the grant monies and opportunities to incentivize redevelopment, as listed on, I think that was about slide 3 or 4. Yeah, slide 2. You lose those. You no longer have the opportunity to do that. One of the things that will happen as a follow-up to the blight assessment is when you establish or reestablish that redevelopment area or the CBD as a whole, you're able to put together a redevelopment plan. And so that is something that the city would undertake and make sure that there is a plan in place to bring those blight numbers down long-term. And so again, that's it's kind of backwards to what you were asking, but that is another piece of the puzzle that is put into place where you can put a finer point on the things that you can do as a city and that the developers can do as they come in to get closer to what the vision is for that area as set by city council and mayor and the citizens as well.
All right, thank you.
I have a question. Obviously, the goal of all of this is to rehabilitate the district and to make it ineligible for GPLED and for the other incentives that we've talked about. And it sounds like the legal standard to do that is when blight is no longer predominant in the area. Is that the legal standard? And if so, what is there is 51% or 49% once blight is at that level? Is that where we ought to, or we're legally required to make a finding that it's no longer eligible, or where's the tipping point between eligible and not eligible?
Mayor, that's a great question. It's interesting. When you look back over time, the designations from other cities, they didn't necessarily have the detailed analysis that we have now. And in fact, we've had both in the 2016 and the 2017 designations. And so if you look back, they didn't provide a specific percentage, and the statute doesn't provide that. But the more recent analysis, if you look at other cities, do look at sort of the 50-51% sort of tipping point. But the statute doesn't provide that kind of clarity.
Okay. So it's a judgment call for us at this point, and when we're at 68% of the acreage, 55% of the parcels, I think it's clear that we could make the determination that it's predominant in the area. I am anxious for this to go forward as well, and for us to continue to have the designation. I think this part of town is kind of going through its awkward teenage years. We've seen some real progress being made, particularly the investment that's come in through the light rail corridor, the fact that a lot of the parcels that have been traditionally on our list of the most blighted and the eyesores in our community, they are now under active development. The Grace property, exciting things are very close at Fiesta Mall. The Brown and Brown property, the CPLC property at Main and Country Club, a lot of the historic buildings in downtown, the grid, I mean, Mesa Drive, we could go on, and we often do. So I think this is a great time. We're just on the cusp of really flipping a lot of the feel of a lot of these neighborhoods. So I'll be very surprised if when this is up for renewal 10 years from now, if we're able to make an argument that it's going to be eligible. But for now, I think it is, and it's important that we continue the designation. I think that this is agendized for us to provide direction. So that doesn't imply a vote, but it does, I think, indicate that we need to express a consensus as to whether or not this ought to be reauthorized. Or Mr. Smith, do we need to take action in terms of a motion and a vote?
Mayor, no, we're going to bring this back at a council meeting for a formal vote.
Okay.
That's really what we want to know,
Councilor-
Mayor, yeah. Sorry, Mayor, we're
Okay,
just
but
looking
fair-
direction to put this on a future council agenda.
Okay. I'm going to gather or suggest that as a result of the positive comments and the thumbs up and the positive nodding I'm seeing from on the various screens, that it's council's desire to move forward and to put it on an agenda for formal action at a later time. Is that fair, council? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is to hear a presentation on Proposition 400, which is the Maricopa County half-cent regional transportation sales tax, and discuss and provide direction on transit and transportation projects to be considered by the Maricopa Association of Governments for the potential extension of the Proposition 400 sales tax.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. This is RJ Zeter with the Transportation Department. With me is Eric Guderian, Deputy Director for Traffic Engineering. So yes, we are here to discuss the possible extension of Proposition 400. Please let me know if you have any questions as we're going through the presentation. We'll talk about what is Prop 400 and what the potential is for renewing or extending, and categories and types of projects that we are exploring. What is Prop 400? Prop 400 was passed by the voters back in 2004. It succeeded Proposition 300 that was approved back in 1985, and it authorized a 20-year continuation of a half-cent sales tax for projects in Maricopa County. The Regional Transportation Plan, which is approved at the Maricopa Association of Governments, outlines all of the transportation projects that are envisioned within the 20-year period. As a part of that, Prop 400 was broken down into three categories. The Freeway and Highway Program, which constituted 56% of the funding, the Arterial Street Program, or ALCP, just over 10%, and the Transit Program, which Jody Sorrell will discuss in a bit, covered a third of the funding from the program. Just to highlight some freeway projects that were completed utilizing Proposition 400 dollars in Mesa is work on the US 60 and State Routes 202 and State Route 24. In total, over $627 million of Proposition 400 dollars were used to improve these freeways. The Arterial Street Program. So this is the dollars that come into Mesa directly to be used on our major streets. Back when the program was established, there was just over $462 million envisioned over the 20-year period. That amount was rebalanced or lowered based on the economy about 10 years ago and dropped Mesa's allocation to just over $409 million. To date, we've received $211 million, almost $212 million in reimbursement. Just over $50 million of that went to arterial streets, and we were able to move funds over to help pay for extension of light rail in Mesa, and that's $160 million. We currently have $64 million of programs that are currently funded, awaiting dollars, and again, that's just under $50 million in arterial projects and an additional $15 million in reimbursement for light rail. In addition to this, there is an available reimbursement through the end of the program in 2025 of $133 million. In addition to Proposition 400, the city has received quite a bit of funding utilizing federal grants, just over $20 million towards our intelligent transportation system. This is our signal system. A great deal of our fiber network was paid for using federal dollars, as well as work in our traffic management center. In addition to that, just over $23 million in active transportation. Bike ped projects has been used to help build our shared use path network in the city, and $1.5 million for street sweepers, which are used to maintain air quality standards. In total, counting transit, the city will have seen $1.2 billion of expenditure within Mesa city limits. So I think that just gives you a sense of the magnitude of the program and how this sales tax has really helped build out our transportation infrastructure. We're now going to move forward into discussing the possible extension of Proposition 400. The current sales tax...
Excuse me, RJ, before you proceed,
Sorry.
I think we may have a question. Mr. Freeman, do you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt. RJ, please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. The current sales tax expires at the end of 2025, so there are regional conversations going on right now, not only at the Transportation Policy Committee, but the managers group that Mr. Brady sits on is actively discussing what an extension of Proposition 400 might look like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. As stated, the MAG has asked or had a call for projects this spring, and they've asked us to look at not only the traditional Prop 400 categories that are freeways, arterials, and transit, but also added two other categories that we're looking at right now, which is active transportation, which would be the bike and ped projects, and then intelligent transportation systems and technology that would help us to be able to run our systems more efficiently. So as we've been doing this and we've been looking at projects for the city of Mesa, we've been looking back at all the planning documents that we have to help us with these projects and to get a list. So the project or the plans that we've been looking at are the City of Mesa Transportation Master Plan, the recently completed Southeast Mesa Land Use and Transportation Plan, City of Mesa Bicycle Master Plan. We're currently doing a long-range analysis and prioritization plan of major intersections that haven't been touched in the past 20 years, and then our ADA prioritization plan. We've broken up to show you these projects into different categories. The first two categories with arterials and maintenance and intersections will fall under the arterial life cycle program in MAG. So with arterials and maintenance, this would be any sort of roadway widening and traditional roadway building if the roadway doesn't exist. We are also proposing that major reconstruction of existing streets that have met their end of life cycle that need to be rebuilt all the way down to the subgrade should be included in this category, so we're including that here. So the intersections category We are also looking at any sort of intersection improvements that would be widening the intersection, or safety improvements to the intersection would be eligible under this program. Active transportation would be shared use paths for bike and ped users, but also any sort of bike and ped improvements on streets that we could do. And then the intelligent transportation systems, or ITS, this isn't to build traffic signals, but this would be to help with our communication network and upgrading our technology to make sure that we can support the Smart City initiative. So here over the next couple slides, we have maps of locations that we've identified. This first map has identified the locations that we'll be submitting for as far as arterial improvement or roadway projects, and then also intersection improvement projects. As I mentioned, as far as the intersection studies go, we have a current study that will be completed by September, that we're looking at all of these intersections, whether there needs to be improvement between now and 2050. So right now we have all of them on the table. As we go throughout the study, some of these may fall off.
So Mayor, what you'll notice is that we have a lot of intersection projects noted kind of in central part of the city, and then not surprisingly, if you look down into southeast Mesa, there's a lot of road segments that either don't exist or need additional lanes added to them.
So this next slide highlights the active transportation projects that we're proposing, and this goes along with our bike and ped master plan. There's been a lot of focus along the Consolidated Canal and in West Mesa with shared use paths. The goal is really to be able to have trails along our entire canal system, and then also have a loop along the 202. So that's what we're proposing out to 2050. And then this map just highlights all of that together, looking to touch on all areas of the city. So as a summary, these are the number of projects or programs that we have in each one of these categories right now that we will be submitting to be part of the regional transportation plan. We have 35 arterial projects, usually broken up in 1 mile or 2 mile segments of roadways. We have 49 intersections currently identified, 6 projects or programs for ITS to keep our traffic management center up to date with software and hardware replacement, and then upgrading our fiber system. And then we have 28 active transportation projects identified.
Thank you very much. Council, do you have questions on this item? So just to summarize, I think we're at the stage, and correct me if I'm wrong, where MAG has issued the call for projects. You're giving us a great summary of all the projects in the city that the Transportation Department has identified as being candidates for funding under the extension of Prop 400. I've reviewed the material previous to this meeting. I think I don't see anything that's not included in that. Correct me if I'm wrong, at some point we are going to need to prioritize. This is kind of a wish list of everything that can or should be done. And there's also, I guess that's my first question. Are we under the impression that we're going to be able to get funding for all of these projects, or is this just a large list that will then need to be prioritized further?
Mayor, with the current half cent, if it was extended at that level, I do not believe we would be able to fund all of our projects that we've noted.
Well, if we got all of the half cent, we could do it.
If we got all of the half cent, we could do it. Yes, that's part of the conversation going on right now, and I'm sure Mr. Earl talk about that some in terms of transit, in terms of operations. We'd like to add a few new categories, as we pointed out, that Eric noted, which is major reconstruction, which is currently not a category that is we can receive Proposition 400 funding on. This is a work in progress, so we've been asked to provide the list of all eligible projects we think would qualify, and we'll continue to work with our regional partners. And if we have to prioritize projects and bring that list down, we'll continue to work on that over time.
And Mayor, as you mentioned, this is the beginning of a process, not the conclusion of a process. So we still have a year and a half discussions going on at the regional levels about defining the different categories and what can be included in that. Is it going to be, how is it going to be any different or the same from the way it has been under the current program, or will it consider or expand the definition of to include more capital maintenance items? So all those are being discussed now, and we'll be coming back to council with briefings kind of as those decisions are made. But we're just at the beginning of a process that'll take more than a year before there's any kind of decision, I think, before everybody has to kind of get down to the final listing of projects.
Okay, thank you. Francisco.
Hey, RJ, did you say which ones did you say are not eligible that you're including or not including?
Currently, major reconstruction is not included, so we haven't, I don't believe we've listed that specifically on this map.
No, because I think we've listed that as a program that we've just identified an annual expense that we would look at. We haven't identified the corridors between 2025 and 2050 that will be reconstructed.
But we do know, sorry.
I know you put down intelligent transportation systems within the intersection work. Is that included in the map?
So currently in the existing Prop 400, the only projects that would be eligible would be the corridor and intersection projects. If we're widening or if we're improving safety, those are currently eligible. The ones that are being proposed as of right now and looked at would be the bike and ped projects, the ITS, the intelligent transportation, and then also then the major maintenance.
So within the map that you have here, the various different maps, those don't include the ITS improvements, or does it include that?
On the council member, on the maps, there are no ITS projects identified because the ITS projects are system-wide, or they would be located just at our transportation management center, so they're not necessarily one point location. Yeah, it'd be fiber. It'd be fiber replacement projects, new fiber, and then so it's for our system. It's not for a specific traffic signal per se.
As we are, council members, we are reconstructing intersections. We are upgrading signals in cabinets currently to try to keep up with the new technology. We've just recently completed a major cabinet upgrade project, actually throughout Mesa. But as Mr. Brady and Eric note, this is really system issues. We don't know how long the current fiber is going to last in the ground, and that is a critical piece of our communications infrastructure. So funding or looking forward to either expand or replace fiber as needed would be a good add to the program.
So just to that point, RJ, do we have identification of those types of projects that if it is included in a Prop 400 extension, that we can also line up those projects with what we're submitting whenever, if those items get changed?
Councilmember, the projects that we've identified as programs as opposed to a specific location, I'd call that a work in progress, but we do know where all our fiber is and how old it is and where we need to make upgrades. So yes, we would be able to very, very quickly submit projects should funding become available.
Okay.
Thank you. Jen.
Yes, could you just, RJ, remind me again on the timeline, or Mr. Brady? So is this for the 2022 boat cycle?
Councilmember Duff, that's in discussion. It has not been set. There have been discussions about a fall 2022 vote, but that has not been nailed down yet.
Okay, thank you.
Jen, I've been party to some discussions at MAG on that topic. Correct me if I'm wrong, RJ, the Prop 400 expires December of 2024, or is it December of 2025?
2025, Mayor.
Thank you. So we have an election or a year or two to decide, to kind of strategize on when we ought to go back to the voters. Right now, as has been indicated, I think that the consensus is 2022 for the vote, but it could be put off and a special election could be called as well. But we have to get approval from the legislature before Maricopa County, for some reason, is the only county in the state that requires the legislature that they can't just call an election on its own. The legislature has to give us the authority to do that. And then they usually do it through the County Board of Supervisors. So there's 2 or 3 levels of government that need to all sign off on putting this on the ballot. And the next, I mean, I agree with this is a good response to the MAG call for projects. I think really everything that we ought to be considering is included in this. So I support going forward with this document, but at some point we're going to need to make a strategy decision as to whether or not we want to ask the voters to continue the half-cent sales tax, or given the volume, the need, if we want to ask for an increase in Prop 400 funding to go. Many are suggesting it ought to be a full 1 cent tax. So that's something that we're going to need to think about and at some point make a decision on, and as we go back to MAG and participate in the regional discussion.
Mayor, can I quickly just throw in, we talked about this the other day, but I think we need to bring it up for all the council to hear and understand also, and RJ, make sure I get this correct. Today, under the current Prop 400 program projects, while there's funding available from the region and there are projects identified for Mesa, in order for the city to be able to draw down the funding from the regional Prop 400, the city also has to commit to 30% of the project cost. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that's what's under the current program. There are some discussions that are just preliminary, obviously, about whether or not that continues out into the future. For Mesa, we have had the fortunate opportunity that our voters have approved transportation bonds, which have allowed us the resources to come up with a 30% to draw down the regional dollars. But there's some communities where that's been more difficult. As you saw on the chart early on, there's still remaining dollars available for Mesa in the future. That would require both the timing of being able to get those projects completed within the next few years, but also requires the financial commitment of the 30%, which sometimes becomes a limitation on whether or not we're able to take on those projects.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions, Council, this is agendized again for just providing direction. Is it the consensus of our council to proceed with and give approval to the list of projects? Thank you. I'm seeing head nods and thumb up. There we go. You guys are smarter than me. You figured out how to put the thumbs up emoji on your screen. That's very impressive. I'll have to figure that out myself. So I think the direction from council is to proceed with the projects that you've identified, and we'll look forward to additional discussion on the Prop 400 discussion going forward.
Thank you, Mayor.
The next item on our agenda for this meeting is item 1C. That's appointments to the Parks and Recreation Board. Human Relations.
Mayor, transit. We still have transit to talk about.
Oh, I apologize. I thought, okay. Excuse me. Please proceed.
Just have Jody just comes up and then.
Oh.
Have.
Well, we saved the best for last. Jody,
yes.
Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. This presentation was actually supposed to be given Monday night, but since we canceled study session, I'm going to kind of go through skip the first parts of the slides, the background part, and just kind of get to the strict transit elements of it. So as RJ stated, transit is about 33% of the existing Prop 400 program. When Prop 400 passed in 2004, we were allocated $551 million. After rebalancing due to the recession and some other factors, we were at $351 million. So far, we've allocated $248 million, and we have $94 million left to spend, but part of that is allocated for future routes in the next 5 years to transition from what is currently being funded by our general fund to be funded by Prop 400. This is just a quick example of some of the projects that Prop 400 has funded in our community. It funds our express bus services into downtown Phoenix. It funded a portion of our local match for Central Mesa and funds portions of our local match for bus purchases. It funds a big part of our dial-a-ride service. It's funded bus shelters, and it funds a significant part of our bus service every fiscal year. When we looked at our Prop 400 projects, we kind of divided them up into 4 categories: what we call high-capacity transit, fixed-route bus, express bus, and regional discussion items for regional discussion. Some elements to consider when we were looking at these: MAG asked us not to add in, not to figure out what is currently in Prop 400 and add that. That maintenance of that existing service will be added in and figured as part of MAG's evaluation. So the high-capacity transit projects or related issues we would recommend putting in include, we've been doing the Fiesta District alternatives analysis, and we've been doing a feasibility study with Tempe to look at extending the streetcar down Rio Salado into Mesa at Riverview, in the Riverview area. So we'd look to add a high-capacity transit project in the Rio Salado, Dobson Southern Country Club corridor. We would also recommend adding funding for light rail operations and maintenance. Currently that comes out of our general fund, and so look to maybe get some Prop 400 extension money for that. We added a future high-capacity transit study to look at if we want to continue expanding high-capacity transit east of Gilbert Road, a study to look at how we might do that, and a potential bus rapid transit route. Phoenix has in their local sales tax fairly robust BRT program, and one of those routes runs along Baseline. And so it makes sense if Tempe wants to add that service that we would add it at least a little bit into Mesa so that it's more convenient for the riders. For our fixed route bus service, we again broke that down further into our existing bus service, and where we focused on, and I should back up. So our fixed route bus and our express bus recommendations are coming from what is in our transit master plan and what is in the Southeast Valley Transit System study that MEG and Valley Metro did with the East Valley cities. And those 2 studies, the items in those studies account for about 95% of what we're putting into the MEG call for projects. So we would look at increasing our service operating to 7 days a week. We have several routes that don't operate on Sundays. Looking at increasing frequency across the board to 15-minute frequency. Expanding our span of service to match light rail, at least on a minimum of the routes that connect to light rail. And to extend service on the existing routes that we can, to extend that east of Power Road to as far as Signal Butte if we can get there. We added 7 new routes in this service. That would include routes on McKellips, Hardy, Ray Road, Val Vista, Greenfield, and Ellsworth. And then we've added an option right now that this is not, could not be part of Prop 400 funding. In Prop 400 funding, if you want to fund it for a bus route, that bus route has to cross jurisdictional boundaries. So it has to go into, for Mesa, like Tempe, Chandler, or Gilbert. But we have areas in Mesa that need some bus service that a 40-foot bus might not be the best option for that. So we want to put in a neighborhood transit category, which would include funding for 2 circulators and possibly 2 micro-transit projects. Then there are express bus service with the Valley growing and express bus service into downtown Phoenix, and soon to be in around the ASU area in Tempe. We're requesting to add additional trips on the express bus that currently operates on the US 60 from Superstition Springs Mall, and on the Red Mountain Freeway from the park and rides at Power and McDowell and Gilbert and McDowell. Looking at adding 1 new express route from Southeast Mesa along the Santan Freeway, and then maybe adding 1 or 2 park and rides into the mix. for our regional policy discussions, some of that is, should there be separate funding sources? Right now, the way everything's are funded out of Prop 400 for the cities is we get what's called jurisdictional equity, or JE, which is a slice of that money based on our population. So every time, all the express buses are funded out of there, Mesa's set part of it. If there's vehicle procurement, they take a part of that out for buying vehicles based on the miles we operate. So this is an opportunity for the region to have discussions, and does it make more sense to have a separate pot of funding of that for express buses, a separate pot for paratransit, and a separate pot for vehicle procurement, so we know kind of that's funded and managed by Valley Metro? Should there be some
Mayor,
money?
Excuse me, Jody, Mr.
Yep.
Freeman has a question.
Jody, where do you anticipate the new park and rides? I see it on your PowerPoint.
Possibly, well, if we add a new express service in Southeast Mesa, we would need one down there off the 202, maybe down by ASU Poly area. And the second one, if we needed to, we could add it east of the 60, further east out there near Signal Butte or Crimson, in that area is what we would look at.
Thank you.
Other areas for discussion would be this last year, MAG and Valley Metro and the cities have made a real effort to look at evaluating our bus stops to ensure that they're accessible. And a big area that sometimes is a barrier for people to use transit is sidewalks are not as accessible as they should be. So should there be a pot of money to improve that accessibility to the bus system or light rail system overall? And then just adding a pot of money for technology. Right now, the region is going through a procurement. Well, we've finished a procurement to procure a new fare collection system, and a new system for the buses to help track ridership and track the buses. And should there be a separate pot for those technology advances, since technology is evolving at kind of a rapid pace? And so that's kind of sums up what we're looking at putting in for our call for projects for MAG.
Thank you, Jody. Council, any questions on this topic? All right, I'm not seeing any hands going up. So, Mr. Brady, is there anything else left on this agenda item?
No, thank you, Mayor. I think you've covered it all.
Okay, so yeah, and I think, as we stated earlier, I think it's my impression council's direction is to proceed with this list of projects, and we'll look forward to participating further in the Prop 400 extension program over the next year or so to define things a little more. All right, the next item on our agenda then is item 2. That's to acknowledge receipt. Oh, I'm sorry. Item 1C, appointments to the Parks, Recreation Board, Human Relations Board, Advisory Board, and Human Relations Advisory Board, and Housing and Community Development Advisory Board. Council, is there a motion to that effect?
I'll make a motion, Mayor.
Thank you. Council, or motion made by Councilmember Duff, seconded by Councilmember Luna. All in favor? This will be interesting. Let's say aye. Yeah, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed? Thank you. That passes unanimously. Mr. Smith, I have a question. When we participate in telephonic meetings with MAG and other places, it seems like we have to do a roll call vote for purposes of the minutes. Do you think, did we accomplish that just now, or do we need to go through a roll call?
Mayor and Council, I think, and I appreciate that we were able to pull up the full screen to show everybody that everyone was there. And so that's also why Deanne asked whether Councilmember Heredia was present. She was doing that at the very beginning.
Okay, so we can do that visually, and we don't need to go through a roll call, is that correct?
Well, Mayor and Council, so a roll call sort of at the beginning of the meeting for being present is one thing, but also when you actually want to vote like what you just did. No, I do appreciate the fact that you asked for the ayes and any opposed, because actually the statute was changed just a couple of years ago, and so on voting. So when we're actually doing voting, yeah, I would ask for ayes and nays and do it just like you just did.
And I guess I was just asking, on in other locations, we're able to hear ayes from all of the council. I just don't want, we just want to create a good record. So you'll tell me if for some reason it's not clear that everyone voted and how they voted, correct?
Yes, Mayor, and that's why I also really appreciate, and the technology we're doing great for our very first time, is that they went to the screen with all the council members there, so we were able to see you all when you were saying aye, and then you also asked if there was any nays, and it was clear that no one said nay. And so that worked out perfectly for our first time.
Okay, great. So again, the result of that was a unanimous vote in favor of making those appointments. The next item on our agenda is item 2. That's to acknowledge receipt of minutes of boards and committees. We need a motion here as well.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Luna made the motion, seconded by Mr. Thompson. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Are there any opposed? Okay, thank you. That passes unanimously as well. The next item on our agenda is current event summary and reports on meetings and conferences attended. Council, anything you'd like to share with us? Okay, I think we've all kind of been hunkered down. Yes, Jen, please go ahead.
I do want to share, in light of everything that we've been going through, is that the Downtown Mesa Association and Visit Mesa have put together a program for the downtown businesses called Mesa's Mile-Long Drive-Through for Curbside Food and Other Goods. And you can find that on the Visit Mesa website / I Love Downtown Mesa. So I just wanted to acknowledge that the work that we're all doing to come together, not only for our businesses and our nonprofits and our residents, and that we all just lean into our humanity with a little kindness and patience and be creative in what we can do to manage life as it is and make the best of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, I saw that on social media last night. I thought I was really impressed. That's a great example of how our local businesses, particularly downtown, is really embracing the idea of social distancing and how the restaurants are converting to pick up and take out formats. So that was very encouraging. And again, I think it's important that we not just talk about what people shouldn't be doing, but we all ought to be doing what we can to participate in the economy and continue to help those great businesses. So thank you for pointing that out. Council, anything else you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I got a question as well, John.
Yes, Jeremy.
I sent out an email yesterday. Obviously, COVID-19 is on everyone's mind. And I asked, we've declared a state of emergency in the city of Mesa. When exactly do we plan on scheduling a meeting so that we can discuss this as a council as far as what our contingency plans look like and, what resources we have available to us?
Well, unfortunately, because this isn't on the agenda, we can't engage in a discussion about this. But it obviously is. Let me say this, and Mr. Smith, correct me if I step too far. The COVID-19 issue, I think, will be on our council agenda probably for the next several months, if not longer. Mr. Brady has indicated to me that he's going to be issuing a fairly detailed city manager's report, as is his practice, that will address in more detail some of the city government's responses to the crisis. I can assure you that our response will be on our agenda so that we can engage in a conversation about it in a public meeting next week. And in the interim, I mean, I think many of us have done nothing but talk about this nonstop for quite a while. So let's engage in telephone calls and in-person meetings where necessary to make sure that all of our council's questions are being resolved. A lot of that discussion doesn't need to take place, in a council meeting. It can take place in telephone calls and emails. Certainly, we'll be respectful of the open meeting laws and not develop a consensus or say more than we should. But I would encourage and invite council to please call me, call Mr. Brady, call each other. Let's make sure that all of our questions are being answered immediately. And to the extent it's necessary to take council action, this certainly will be on our agenda for as action items next week and probably every week thereafter.
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm referring to, sorry, I realize right now we're on still on item 3. I'm referring to item 4, which is scheduling of meetings. And I guess Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we're not able to all call each other and have this conversation offline. And I guess my greater concern is, you know, what are we doing as a team, or what are we doing as a council? Well, I'm sorry. I would like to schedule a meeting so that we can discuss this as a council as to what we're going to do to approach this from a team perspective, rather than, you know, just having all these phone calls on the side, so that we can make sure that all of our items are properly addressed.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think you're asking me to put it on the agenda and to have a discussion, and we'll do that. But in the meantime, I would suggest that, you know, we can have great conversations, probably more detailed conversations outside of these meetings as well. So there's no reason to delay having those conversations or getting all of our questions answered. Immediately after this meeting, please call me or call Mr. Brady, and we can begin that process immediately. But in the meantime, yes, absolutely, it will be part of our agenda going forward.
Thanks, John.
You bet. Council, any other comments on meetings? Or I should also say that the governor's office has been having a daily telephone conference for mayors that I've been participating in, as has the White House has been having similar meetings, teleconferences every few days that I and city government have been participating in. I think it's important that we remind ourselves and each other and the public that there's a lot of information that we are trying to share, a lot of resources that we're trying to get out, to push out to the community. So the maysaaz.gov/coronavirus location is a great place to find resources. As I indicated on Monday, I think part of my concern is I feel a sense of anxiety in the community over food security. There's a lot of people that are being impacted financially as a result of the downturn in the economy, hourly workers and others that are experiencing genuine anxiety over food security. It's important that we let them know that there are a lot of community resources available, and that and we help in that regard. So there's some great tools located at the maysaaz.gov/coronavirus on that topic. Also, the azhealth.gov/COVID-19 location has a lot of detailed information for those who want more information about the health aspects and pursuing getting medical advice and help in that regard as well. And again, as I indicated, our city manager will be providing more details in his email report, as well as to the details of how city government is functioning in the midst of this challenge. Mr. Brady, what does our schedule look like for future meetings?
Right now, Mayor, our next scheduled meeting would be our study session for a week from today.
Okay, thank you. Council, if there's nothing else, that completes the items on our agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, and Mr. Luna seconded it. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.